19. Will you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning. I believe before we have citizen input, that our attorney, Mr. Doyle, wanted to say something.
Yes, Commissioner. I've spoken with Mr. Anderson and Mr. Lilac. Staff is recommending that the board pull item number 3 from the action item agenda and that be addressed at a subsequent meeting.
Okay. Do we need a motion for that?
It would be changing the agenda.
Yes.
Yep. So, yeah, just with new information, there's a discussion to be had, so I do support that. So I'll move removing item number 3 from the agenda.
And I'll second that motion. Any other further discussion? Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Commissioner Adair, yes. So item number 3 has been pulled today.
And I do support having a discussion today on the subject, so it may be an executive session item that we'll have to compare notes on or something.
Okay. Executive session. So then with the consent agenda,
So, yeah, there's one item on the consent agenda, and I'll move approval.
and I'll second that. Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Commissioner Adair? Yes. I do want to acknowledge that we do have 3 citizens that will be serving on our Public Health Advisory Group. It's an enormous responsibility, and I want to thank Dr. Robert Ross, Charity Ludwig from Redmond, and Rebecca Berry from the Central Oregon Health Council for serving. Their work is appreciated, so thank you. We need to now reconvene as the governing body for Black Butte Ranch County Service District budget. The item was for number 3. Well, he's for number. He was wanting to speak in reference to item number 3. Mr. Dennis Polish.
Right, the board's pulled item number 3, so they're not going to be dealing with that issue today. So I think that probably moots the need to provide any citizen input. And typically, citizen input is for items that are not on the board's agenda, so probably wouldn't have been appropriate to have citizen input on that. We are going to reconvene at the staff level and speak with the board on that issue. As you folks are aware, there was some very recent correspondence that came in, and staff wants some time to study some of that and be able to speak to the board about that. So number 3, which is the PRC amendments and partnership agreement, has been pulled for today.
Thank you. The comment section actually addresses agenda items. So when you have citizen input and you have a questionnaire that has board items right on the question, agenda items right on the question, I would think a citizen could discuss an agenda item.
Yeah, that's a good catch, and I don't know if that's a recent change in it, but typically citizen input is for items that are not otherwise on the agenda. And if they're on the agenda, then they're typically brought up in the context of the agendized items. So I apologize for that confusion. We'll fix that.
Thank you, Dennis. And we do have your letter, so thank you very much. Okay, reconvening as the board. We have consideration of the board signature of a letter reappointing Rick Hartnack to the Black Butte Ranch County Service District Budget Committee.
So this is the Public Safety Agency at Black Butte Ranch, the committee that manages that district, and we are the governing body. So with that, I'll move board signature of letter reappointing Rick Hartnack to the Black Butte Ranch County Service District.
And I'll second that motion. Any further discussion?
Nope.
Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Commissioner Adair, yes. So we will now no longer convene as the Black Butte, and now we're going to reconvene as the role of Deschutes County.
Mm-hmm.
So our first item is the Wildfire Mitigation Advisory Committee. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, and I had these other ones.
Jody's here for this.
Yep.
Did I ask now? Okay.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Zechariah Heck, Associate Planner with the Community Development Department. This morning, I am here to present the applications that we received for the Wildfire Mitigation Advisory Committee. We had an application period for just under a month. The deadline closed on August 26th. A total of 32 applications were received, and they cover all categories that were discussed in order to represent different perspectives for this advisory committee. So we have several members from the fire service or first responder category, as well as home builders, realtors, at least one insurance representative, many homeowners or HOA representatives, and 2 planning commissioners. I'm here to answer any questions you might have about those applications, look to you for direction on next steps on how to proceed with appointing various members to this committee. The memo provided in your packet does provide a table addressing each, or sort of categorizes all of the applicants. I also want to note that, and apologize that in the packet, the application packet I provided the board for the public, because there are applications with some personal information. I provided hard copies to the board and county administration, and in that packet, when I compiled all of the individual PDFs that were submitted, the fillable form on Acrobat ended up copying over several of the applications. So it looks like in your packets, one individual applied 4 times. That's not accurate. And for the record, I did provide the commissioners and administration with an updated version with all 32 applicants. So I apologize and regret that error. The last thing I'll mention is we are planning to have a sort of a project management team that will be comprised of county staff as well as staff from the cities of Lapine and Sisters, because we manage their building programs. We will help guide and decide how to best present this information and provide regular updates to the commission. That's a new outcome that we've decided since we last talked. So with that, here to answer any questions, or otherwise look to the board for the direction on how to appoint the committee members.
One thing I noticed that Brian Braddock, you have him down in the other category, but he actually was with Farmers Insurance for 39 years. You know, they're a West Coast firm. They're now in Thousand Oaks, California, is where their center is, and they have, his expertise from that company. I thought there's only one other person in the insurance, so I thought maybe he should go up in that category. I know we said we were only going to take one of those, but he had extensive experience, and Farmers is a pretty amazing as far as fire goes.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that note, Commissioner Adair. Mr. Braddock did check the box of the other category,
Did he?
and so that's why, I was just looking black and white and put him in that box. But his record does show that he has quite the extensive insurance background. So, yeah, arguably, he should be in the insurance representative category or considered for that
Yeah,
position as well.
It's hard to know.
And that also reminds me of, we did have 2 other applications that were submitted past the deadline from various backgrounds. I think 2, actually both of them were in the home builder construction background. They weren't provided in your application packet because they were provided after the deadline. But if the board decides that you would like to see more applicants, there has been a lot of interest in this committee, and we can provide those as well if needed.
I know, it's phenomenal, the people that have applied and their expertise, a cross-section of, fire, insurance, builders, homeowners, HOAs, just what we were hoping for in order to get ahead of the situation.
Absolutely.
So could we take a moment and, the goals are wildfire hazard zone, a map in Deschutes County, building code standards and regulations to mitigate wildfires. Can you kind of remind me the sideboards on that, as in this committee could come up with all kinds of ideas? What are we going in with for a committee like this? And maybe it's to be determined, but yeah, let's have that discussion for a little bit.
Absolutely. So I'll start, and Nick can add in as necessary. The planning staff or community development staff had met with the board for several months discussing a recent amendment, potential option for an amendment to the building code called R327.4, and that captures additional standards that Deschutes County could incorporate it into the building code when reviewing new dwellings.
So, yeah, with that standard, it's kind of a yes or no question at that point. It's optional to adopt, and if we do adopt it, it's in its entirety or not.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's kind of the level I'm just trying to get clarity on.
Yep.
So that's a yes or no question for building code standards.
Yep. And then we're also looking for the Wildfire Mitigation Advisory Committee to consider a 2015 audit by the University of Oregon's community service team that looked at our natural hazard, our code based on natural hazards, and recommended several additional policies that could be incorporated to reduce potential losses in the county based on land use standards.
Land use, yep.
And those would cover defensible space, primarily driveway access, et cetera. And so that's, whereas the building code standards are very prescriptive, they're written in state law, the land use standards are not, and they are much more nebulous, if you will, in terms of what the committee could recommend to the board finally.
And we have examples of the West Side Transect and the Miller Tree Farm. Those would be kind of the examples that we put in code for specific developments. So then the question there is, are these for existing parcels that have not been developed on, or future parcels?
That's a good question, something we'd
Could be.
probably look for the committee to.
Yep, okay, for clarity, okay. And then the wildfire hazard zone map itself. Previously, basically, Deschutes County was at one number, one designation, and now this committee would be charged with come up with a recommendation for the map if there was different zone designations.
Correct. Yeah, so the map itself, the wildfire hazard zone that speaks to R327 is informed by the wildfire hazard zone.
And R327 is a building code standard we're talking about, yes or no? So those two go together. And just trying to make sure I'm real clear on what.
Yeah.
Commissioner, for the record, Nick Lelak, Deschutes County Community Development Director, I do think it's important that we just put on the record that the zone, the hazard zone map, will be based on the Oregon Department of Forestry's 4 criteria outlined in state law, and that's going to be critical, and there could be variations of how that's applied in the county at the regional scale, the landscape scale, but we plan to draft a charter for this group, and we'll share it with the board, of course, first, that everybody agrees that these are the standards we're going to use, we're going to use to develop the map. So it's not going to be, while there are many other great ideas and whatnot that maybe should influence the map, this is going to be based strictly on the law. And if committee members are not in agreement, then it may be best for them not to participate in the process, because we need to keep this really confined to what is in
That's
state law.
my thought process, exactly. So a charter of the committee would be done with the committee's input, and is that it? Kind of a consensus of the group, or?
I think this
Yeah,
will
see,
be- this
there's
will
kind
be-
of a catch-20.
I would suggest that staff draft the charter, have the board approve it, and then we present it to the committee. If this were going to be a year or 2-year-long process, then maybe there could be more input, like we've had with, like, for example, the Sisters Implementation Committee. It's where it's really an informative stage and going, this is a really defined project.
Mhm.
And I suggest that we work with the board so that we clearly establish the expectations for the committee so that they can make informed decisions if they're going
And that's
to.
kind of my thought process, because this could go in a lot of different ways.
And it is fascinating what happens with the numbers. And, just by your presentation, a month or two ago, you can see, if you mingle the number, or, you commingle them, and then you're going to get a 7, or you're going to get a 6.5, when it's only a 6.4, and that, that 6.4 is going to be critical for insurance factors and things. So, yeah, you have to follow the law precisely, I believe. So, yeah, it's going to be a huge job.
So it's great that we've seen so many applicants, people involved, willing to, put time in on this topic. As I say, we just spoke a little bit about what the scope and the expectation might be. I do support the fact that, let's define a charter of the decision points up front so we can get to that. We have looked at the map and versions of how would it calculate out, referring to these criteria defined, Department of Forestry is the criteria?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, we've looked at versions of the map, and it gets interesting pretty quick.
But someone, actually, Nick was commenting the other day, weren't they, that they were saying that that doesn't take into account structures and what structures can do in fires? It was that?
That was in the newspaper, structures as fuel.
Yeah. Well, I heard somebody say that, and I was just thinking, they can really contribute to a fire, so.
Right, it's certainly a
Yeah.
valid point. It's just that the Oregon Department of Forestry's
Right.
standards are.
That doesn't include them.
Climate and. can't think of the
Slope?
fourth one.
Did you say slope?
Slopes, vegetation, climate, and there was one other
Oh,
factor. There's 4 criteria.
what is it?
It'll provide.
I knew there was going to be some way we could get him up here.
Okay.
Good morning, for the record, Ed Keith, County Forester. So, yeah, the 4 factors are weather, which is one score for the whole county, topography, there's certain slope breaks, and then there's 2 vegetation factors, actually. One is the fuel type, and one is the fuel continuity. So, you could have a volatile fuel type, but if it's broken up, and it only covers 15% of the landscape, it's a much lower score than if it's 100% continuous across that landscape with the given fuel type, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're here to kind of whittle down 32 applicants to a group of 7 to 12. And I hadn't really prepared a matrix to offer right now, but at this point, it is all laid out. I would like to, possibly postpone this subset of, selections.
Right.
But we can get to it now that we've really had this discussion. I just asked my questions that we want to do, and we're doing this in the public meeting, so.
And can you work on the charter then?
We can, that's a great idea.
Work on the charter now, because you could ask someone and show them the charter that we've approved, and if they don't feel comfortable with it, then, with 32 applicants, we definitely, and we need 12 positions at the maximum, so.
Well, it's kind of up to us, but yeah, yep.
We didn't expect to have 30 outstanding applications.
I know.
There are so many it's certainly a tough decision for the board, but what we can do is we can prepare the charter and then schedule a follow-up meeting with the board. We have a commissioner out this week and maybe a commissioner out next week, so maybe we'll be looking for a couple of weeks out. That gives us the time to draft the charter and for the commissioners to begin to think about the applicants, if that is.
Absolutely.
That's a
That'd be
good
great.
timeframe that works for.
And you said there was 2 applicants that had completed application after a deadline? I'd be interested in seeing those names or, including them. I don't know, this is our process, so.
Well,
Do you support that?
no.
Oh, well, I was
No,
just
I mean,
throwing
we
it
have
out.
32 fabulous
Yeah, okay.
people, and they followed the rules. They
Yep,
got it here
that's fine.
timely. So,
So let's not do that. Well, that good.
but
gives
if we
clarity.
need them, if,
Yeah.
if someone can't serve, then we can always go to them and pick them up at that time.
Good. There you go.
I guess it's 1 and 1, right, today?
Oh, yeah, that's fine, yep.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for being prepared, and we will never forget those 4 things now. What we add. Okay, so now, Tim, continued discussion.
Good morning. For the record, Tim Shimke, Director of the Department of Solid Waste. We're here today to continue our discussion on the Solid Waste Management Plan and hear any questions or concerns that the board has on the plan before we move towards formal adoption. I'm not sure what kind of questions you might have in the general document. Certainly, the question of privatization is out there. Tony mentioned just this morning that he kind of likes the idea of a position paper that would be an appendix to the plan, which basically would say the question of privatization has been raised. Here's where we embrace the private sector currently in the system, and basically a commitment to consider the private sector at the appropriate points during the implementation of the plan. So, for example, I think one of the first things that will come at us is the plan recommends that we target construction and demolition waste to try and get more recovery. An approach to that would be a fairly substantial, probably $700,000 to $1 million investment into equipment, sort line, screens, et cetera. I think before we make that decision, we have that discussion about who's the appropriate party to own and operate. Maybe we own and private sector operates, maybe private sector does both, maybe we do both. But I see that with C&D recycling, I see that with the operation of the new transfer station in Redmond after it gets built, that operations look quite a bit different. How much should we consider the private sector in that operation? And then, of course, siting of the landfill, whether it's the siting process, the permitting, the construction and operation, all of those are factors that could be considered to be provided by the private sector.
So, yeah, just like I said, an addendum, maybe 1 or 2 pages, maybe just a few paragraphs. A lot of the information you just provided is kind of implied in the solid waste plan. But as I say, we've heard a few times, Budget Committee and a SWAC member at a previous meeting saying, well, what about privatization? And it's a specific question. This is a point in time. It's a once in a generation. And I do like the idea of just documenting what the frame of mind is while we adopt this document in its entirety. We've got a great history in Deschutes County, solid waste, cost-effective franchise relationships with private industry. So it's really kind of the state, maybe it's a state of the industry and relationships is part of this, addendum also. The history of, another item that came up is the history. We didn't have a solid waste advisory committee for many years, and, there was a contentious time where this discussion was happening in the past. So that may be just a few words also in there, because then it puts the whole thing in context. A 20-year context is what I'm referring to, but this is that point in time, as I mentioned, that if that question's been asked,
Okay.
how we're answering that question. So that really kind of puts it out there. The words on paper, people can buy into it. And we have something, because the other concept is, the citing process. And there's words in here talking about the state legislature being supportive of, future activities where this needs to happen. Long history in the state of Oregon of, contentious land use or whatever, the terminology might be on that. So those are the concepts that I could see in it. And just an addendum or a piece of paper.
We could actually write a recommendation in the administrative chapter, Chapter 8. So you could write it in there as a recommendation, here's the points and we'll consider privatization. Or you could, as suggested, it could just be a 1 or 2 page position paper that's an appendix, which kind of lays out that we have looked at privatization and we will be considering it in the future.
Yeah, and we do have a great history of it, as I say. I mean,
Yes.
it's also the lay of the land as it is now. This document talks about the system as it is and where we want to go with it, but there's just another little aspect of the point in time that we're at right now, because moving the landfill, because we had the rural, smaller regional landfills, and they've all consolidated. So it's just that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts, Commissioner?
Yes, I was just thinking about the fact that you do run a superb program, and I just feel like we do have to look at privatization on some scale, but I know that siting is really important, and the fact that Deschutes County residents came through and said they wanted to keep it here. I think it's got to be really impactful that, Portland sends all of their waste over to Gilliam County. But people here feel like we need to be responsible, and, how we do that and how we cite the plan and how quickly we can get that land into the process. of approval. So, no, but I do think we do need to look at privatization on some level, just to see, would it make sense? Are they really running it better than we would? You know, the part of the business that you run. When you were just talking about Redmond a minute ago, were you talking about doing like recycling at the Redmond location?
So the current transfer station does have facilities for people to drop their recyclables.
Right.
We don't have a compost operation there. As we move to the new facility, we will get land use approval for a compost operation as well as the transfer station. And the recycling facility associated with the new transfer station may be a little bit more extensive than what it is today. I mean, I suspect that the new transfer station up there will look a lot like not landfill, with that recycling and that organics operation there at Knott kind of being repeated over there at Negus.
So then you're saying that we wouldn't have to move it to Knott or the next location. They could actually do the work there, which would make sense.
Yes. As far as the compost operation goes,
the
yes.
compost operation, yes.
We considered relocating the main compost operation away from its current location, but then when you look at, that'll still be the receiving station for all that feedstock that comes in, and then if you look at the cost of grinding it and transporting it to a more rural compost site, is very, very expensive. We can invest in considerable infrastructure to make the facility at Knott work well, even though it has closer neighbors. So that's the direction I think that we're going. Now, when we'll kind of repeat that. I don't know how quickly we'll actually be composting in Redmond, but certainly when we look at our cost for dealing with organics, when we're talking about the yard debris that people bring, as well as the fire-free load that comes in every year, that cost of grinding and transporting from Negus to Knott is very, very substantial. So that's kind of what's driving us to say, maybe we should consider composting at Negus itself, creating a finished product and selling that product there instead of moving it all here. Again, I'm not exactly sure how quickly we'll get to that point. We'll certainly get land use approval for it as part of the construction process, but actual implementation is yet to be determined.
Well, it makes sense. I was looking at Freyr on Saturday when I was there, and there wasn't that much of landscaping waste, there. I don't know how often you have to clean that up and haul it, but there wasn't really that much. But you think of the combustibility of it. If someone threw a cigarette out the doors, out the window, it could be a problem.
So we usually go out there and grind and clean it out just before fire-free, because we know there's going to be a big slug. And then usually right after fire-free, we'll clean it out again. And that's usually all we do. Then it just builds up over the course of a year until the next spring when we do this, we repeat the process. So the volume there is pretty small. There's no need to do it more often, I guess.
The half-day for the fire-free in the fall, is that the last weekend of October? Just, the half-day free?
So it's actually a half price
Half price.
at Knott landfill only.
Only? Oh, I didn't know that.
So, yeah, we haven't done that I don't believe, at the transfer stations at all. It's just once in the spring free
Right.
for a weekend, 2 days. But then in the fall, it's just Deschutes Recycling offering half price disposal.
Okay. All right. Because I wasn't aware of it, so now I know why I wasn't aware of it. It wasn't at my
It
neighborhood.
doesn't happen at your neighborhood.
Yes, it's not in my neighborhood,
We
so,
can consider,
okay.
adding that, but
And here I just thought it would be, what is our cost of that? And could we add it totally free in the fall, but we don't even have it at the other places, so, okay. How impactful is that, half price weekend?
it's popular
Significant?
here. One of the reasons why we don't do a free event in the fall is the fear that people will hoard through the fire danger season, waiting for that fall free event. So we wanted to avoid that. Now, we're probably doing that to a certain extent when we offer half price pay. People are probably going to save it up to a certain extent, but we don't think it would be near as extensive as if we said we're going to have a free event in the fall, then we wouldn't see anything coming in during the summer. It'd be stacking up out there.
The unintended consequences, yes.
That's right.
Thank you.
Well, so the bigger picture of the solid waste management plan draft document for near-term approval, the recommendations, the schedule, it does hang together well. I mean, this is a wonderful product, and I don't know if we've had this discussion. I have read it in more detail now. Having a solid waste advisory committee and active staff and leadership in the department empowers me to lean towards the fact that, yeah, this is getting close to being able to be adopted, and then we can move forward. So, as I say, there's no recommendations or words that I would propose really changing in the document itself, other than adding some information.
Okay, okay.
I know, I agree, the ad would be important, if we could do that. And I think the fact that if we can, as a county, let people know that 25.2% of waste is from food, so that people really are consciously trying to do a better job of not throwing away so much food. It's enormous,
It is.
yes.
Great.
So,
Hopefully that sets direction and kind of
Okay.
getting closure here.
so we're almost there.
Almost there. Not ready to set a date for adoption.
Well, yeah, not
We
right
need
now,
to
but we'll, yeah.
get
it'll-
Phil to weigh in here before we get to that point. Okay?
If, yes, maybe like on the 18th, if you have that, September 18th, in 2 weeks.
Okay. I'll, well, we'll get the document drafted, and I'm going to approach it from it's going to be an appendix as opposed to integrated into the plan. We'll run it by you guys for your approval, and that'll be done certainly prior to the 18th, so you'll have a totally complete document to consider adopting if indeed the 18th works for everybody.
Yeah.
Great.
I like that as a proposed date, and we'll go from there.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Shimke.
Thank you. I'm excited.
I thought you liked coming to our meeting.
Yeah. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for a few weeks, yeah.
I can stop by every Wednesday if you'd like, just to say hi.
Oh, well, of course you can. It's only, what is it, 20 minutes out there? 25?
Not even
It's not that, oh,
15 minutes.
15? You can go that fast. Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and I see we have, Project Wildfire and folks here. But just some statements. So, we did have our meeting what was it, Monday, or yesterday? Was it yesterday?
It was
Sorry.
yesterday.
Yeah, oh, boy. But, setting direction to Project Wildfire. The path is open. Let's figure out what we're going to do. Let's, add resources is kind of the concept. Let's take it to the next level of whatever that is. And Ed may have talked to you about this. I'm speaking to Jody specifically as Project Wildfire contractor. Let's figure out a proposal for, taking it to the next level a little bit. If there was money to be spent, what would we do? Inviting the neighborhood associations and, residents of the area to really get up to speed and maybe provide resources for neighborhood activities also. So very positive.
Yes. And I've been working with some people out in the Cloverdale area that are really concerned about doing more cleanup. So it seems that people are very aware of the opportunity they have to make a difference. And I'm working on my second 1,000 cards, so.
There was a chipper and a chainsaw going at 7:30 in my neighborhood this morning, so somebody's doing something.
Somebody
pretty
is
big
working
today.
hard.
Yeah.
So, thank you. All right, so, is there anything else on our agenda now? We're going upstairs?
So recess for follow-up?
We don't necessarily have to today. I don't know.
Okay.
Urgency. If the
That's
board
fine.
wants to, we could certainly recess upstairs for an executive session. We're in state litigation. That's something you want to do in light of today's development.
Yeah, I'm available for that.
I would like to hear. I know that Commissioner Henderson will definitely want to hear, but I would like to hear today, just, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, so
I will text Nick and James. Do you want to say 10:45?
Sure.
Okay.
So we're now adjourning from our meeting here, and we will be going upstairs for executive session.